Hello, and welcome to another episode of Technology for a Change. We're on season 3, and it keeps getting better. Today, we have with us Jeremy Thomas as our guest for our podcast today. He is the CEO of Astral Tech Limited, a SaaS-based company offering digital transformation for the energy and the utility companies. So let's dig right into what it is that you do and hear it from yourself. What kind of initiatives and how's your journey been so far, and how did you end up here in Dubai?
Okay, so basically the platform is the digital interface between the energy retailer and the energy customer, be it a domestic customer or a small business customer or an industrial and commercial customer. So everything that they need to do, from the basics like log on, pay their bill, look at their consumption, through to viewing maybe trading positions, position reports and things like that for those markets that are deregulated in the world, because some of that stuff may not be that relevant to areas of the world where the market is not competitive.
Interesting. And yeah, the second part of the question in terms of I would love to be able to introduce you more, but for the audience, do give us an intro of yourself in your own words.
So originally from the UK, was a business transformation entrepreneur, and looked at digitally transforming lots of different industries, from lettings to we even had a product a bit like Dropbox before Dropbox came out, for transferring large files from designers to the printers when print ruled the day before digital media. So this was kind of 99, 2000. And then kind of fell into the energy sector and realized that I wanted to be involved in a sector that had longevity, slightly pessimistically involved in a sector that I thought was recession proof as well.
All right.
Because I'd grown up in the UK, we had things called Black Wednesday, where the economy fell to bits in the course of a day. So I wanted something that was a little bit recession proof, and I don't know why I'd even be thinking like this in my 20s, but I even thought I wanted it to be war-proof, which is interesting. But given where we are, and we have a bit of an energy crisis caused by, I guess, military disruption to the world, maybe that wasn't such a pessimistic view on what our future might look like. Maybe it was realistic.
I see. And what did you do? What were you doing before you got into the energy sector? And I mean, there must have been a tipping point where you said, "Hey, you know what? I'm gonna do this." Or
so I was involved.
What was that background like?
I was involved in generic development, really to order from various people, and I got involved in the water sector, where we were looking at producing software that helped support businesses that were finding leaks, looking to optimize water consumption. And I realized that this was kind of water management, I guess. And I realized that this was quite a good thing. And then I built a business around smart metering. But that was before smart meters were really a thing. As far back maybe as 2005, 2006, thought about that. And obviously smart meters, they're rolled out in some countries, but certainly not all. So kind of had the idea to build a business around consumption data through digital metering. And really it just came from there. And I think as well, I wanted to move away from doing technology to order for various customers and move towards having a product was applicable to a wider range of customers and was essentially SaaS. Although, to be honest, SaaS wasn't
a thing.
It didn't exist. SaaS wasn't a word that existed in those days, but realized that I wanted to resell a product with a SaaS revenue model, essentially.
Interesting. And I mean, that's why we basically have Jeremy here. I mean, before SaaS was a thing, you came up, with that model, and you got on that bandwagon where, I mean, with software, what do you think the difference is? We're looking back, 1999, 2000 to now. How much has software development really evolved? What are some of the key changes that you've noticed?
Well, it has changed a lot, but there's also a good case to say it hasn't changed as much as the verbiage suggests it might have done. So, I mean, when we talk about SaaS, we're really just talking about a singular code base where you're responsible for delivering a service, and the revenue model builds a recurring revenue stream. I mean, that's from a business perspective. That's obviously the attractive perspective of SaaS. I think the way it's changed particularly is in where you have multi-tenanted software applications. Before, the modus operandi would be to install install a software application on people's servers that sat in their data room in their building. And obviously now that's moved into data centers, and then that in itself has been encapsulated in what we call cloud services. But of course, cloud services still sit in the same data centers that
they just rent it out now.
Yeah, right. And they've got I mean, it's probably beyond my knowledge to know exactly how Amazon and Azure deliver their services. But yeah, we leverage that to good effect. I think most of the world do now.
And then, with the introduction of the iPhone, mobile phones, I think that's the only major difference that in software, as being particular, that's the only introduction that's come up there.
Well, I guess so. I mean, from a software development perspective, it's just a different user interface.
Absolutely.
For the same actual software program. But yeah, it dramatically changes the way customers interact, and it dramatically changes when they interact, and also how proactive that software service needs to be. Before, it was a case of the customer logging on, looking at stuff. Mm-hmm. Now we tell them bits of information when they need to know. And of course, we're on the consumer end of the market. We're delivering that through notifications.
People often have this, I would say, myth about software development is that, hey, you could develop perfect software in a matter of 6 months or 1 year, even if they bootstrap. But I'm sure you've come across multiple iterations, multiple aspects. Or what version are we on for Astral Tech?
That's an interesting question. I don't even know that we would know the answer. I mean, I think most good software programs, sometimes you change your architecture completely. So you might have started building something back in 2005 in one language, and now with a couple of languages on, and you might have maybe had a monolithic architecture, and you've decided to remodel it in microservices or something like that. But sorry, what was the question?
That was what version are we at with Astral Tech? I mean, looking at these different SaaS-based companies that continuously come up with iterations, changes, versions, updates.
Yeah, so I mean, it's like most things in life nowadays, software is about continual improvement. And unless you're going to re-architect, then, you're releasing all the time, continuously.
We're hearing this from someone who has been able to capture 23% of the UK's energy sector.
So 23% of the UK's C&I, so that's the commercial industrial meters, they're on our platform, digitally.
Amazing. That's wonderful. And you've taken the product to US successfully, and you're now in Dubai.
Yeah, absolutely. So bootstrapping into the US was quite a thing for us. I mean, we did it pretty lean. How did we do it? Essentially paid to go and speak at various conferences. So we're on panel shows, on panels at trade shows, and then doing some presentations, building a personal network. So me and other senior people within Astral Tech. And then actually we did that in 2019. Thought that the pandemic had killed it because, of course, we couldn't travel to the US to follow up. But interestingly, during the pandemic and entirely virtually, we landed our first 2 US customers. One, a market entrant in the residential energy retail sector, and another, a multi-state sort of global brand commercial and industrial retailer. So that was very good, and good that we'd done it fully virtually. Of course, since we've been back out there, now we're all allowed to travel again. We were at 3 key conferences this year. And yeah, what brought us to Dubai? Well, Dubai's great. It's got a good hub of tech talent, and also the time zone is really good for global businesses because you can speak to Australia at 9 in the morning UAE time, and it's kind of like 5 p.m. in Australia.
Right.
And then at the end of the day, 5 p.m. UAE time, you can pick up 9 a.m. in the US. It's basically the only time zone in the world where you can do that. In UK, you have to be online at 5-6 to speak to Australia, which is pretty hard to do on a regular basis.
It's been really helpful for our co-located teams as well. I mean, coordinating with them in the US and Ukraine or North Africa.
Yeah.
And I would say that would be a great reason to explore that. Now, what has the difference been in terms of bootstrapping? Was there any specific difference that you came across? Bootstrapping in UK, bootstrapping in US versus Dubai?
Well, I wouldn't say we really only bootstrapped in the UK. And when I did it, bootstrapping also wasn't a word that existed in the dictionary. I don't think it was just a question of growing a business without an investor or organically growing a business. And I did a speech at GITEX a few weeks ago, and I think one of the fundamental things that people might have taken from that speech is your customers are your investor when you're growing a business organically. And I really like it because it obviously makes you a very customer owner-centric organization, whereas I think I see in some startups, they're very investor-centric. So everything's to please their investors, deliver the numbers, get to the next stage, get their next round of investment, and everything's geared towards that. When you don't have that pressure, there's only one judge of your service, and that's your customer. And I think that really goes hand in hand with delivering service excellence. So building the product was really done in the UK with UK customers, and then moving into US, that was essentially pursuing a sales channel, but on a very lean basis. So you might, with investor, you might hire a couple of people, open up an office, sink a bit of money and hope for the best. But we managed to do it with some good personal experiences, traveling around the US, getting on stage at various trade shows, etc., and then just creating a personal network. So that was the bootstrapping side in the US. And then coming to the UAE, that was partly a personal decision, partly the time zone advantage that I described earlier, but also post-pandemic or during the pandemic, it was very clear that virtualization was wholly acceptable across the world. And so that really meant that with predominantly UK customers, it was okay to be owner running the company from a different country. And in fact, now I would never run a company in the same time zone because if it's 9 a.m. in the UK, I've had a great morning. I've had a wholesome breakfast, I've trained, and I'm on fire at 9 o'clock UK time. So this has been a really key difference in motivating the UK team, because 9 o'clock in most organisations, people aren't always that sharp. They need a couple of coffees to get going. I'm on fire, and it lights everybody else up. So that's been a huge advantage. And I'd say I can't say I attribute all of the success we've had sort of post-pandemic to that move, but it's certainly driven an awful lot of change. That thinking time in the morning. I mean, I'd coach that into startups that wanted to really think about how do I optimize my organization, give the leaders that thinking time. And if you get up at 7, that's 5 hours before your first meeting. That's an awful lot of thinking time to get your strategy right in your head and all the rest of it. And it's entirely valuable, because if you do that at the end of the day, you're sometimes fatigued. You've got information overload from all the stuff you've consumed during the day. So doing that early doors, they call it the 5 a.m. club if you do it in the UK, of course. But those people, they look fatigued after doing this for 8-10 years. Yeah. They're burned out, right? So having that time zone advantage, I think, is really key.
Absolutely. And this is one of the reasons why it is the global hub. You're able to connect with, all sorts of, it's become a center of trade and even tech. We've been working with Revel Ventures to bring in a lot of our US products into the UAE. And that's one of the things that they noticed was that, they can actually manage and reach across the other side of the world. You've basically, I would say, a self-taught entrepreneur. And, at that time, I believe there were just a few people that were really, I don't even know if entrepreneurship was really that term, how it is looked upon today.
No, I think I used to misspell it. I used to miss out the R at one point as well, till I saw it written down enough times in the early days.
So at that given point in time, did you have any mentor, anyone to look up to, or was this all trial and error?
So definitely there are people I've looked up to along the way, and I actually really like this question because it's kind of close to my heart, because I've never had an individual mentor, but I've been lucky in that I've been able to identify, I call it bits of gold dust, given to me from disparate sources, some of them close to me, some of them from afar, and these are words they're the sort of phrases I always remember. There's been key people within my early UK customer base where keep it simple was one of the, especially in technology, keep it simple, stupid. So KISS. Yeah, exactly. So that definitely attributable to an old friend of mine, Palle Stenver, who was at a Copenhagen business school, and he created a whole methodology I worked with him on it actually, for bridging the gap between strategy and execution. So basically a whole methodology to digitally transform an organization, which was pretty interesting and was a big education. And then there was another chap, Mike Hogg, I'm sure he won't mind me mentioning his name. He taught me the importance of people within the organization.
Culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say that I work very closely with those two people and have an awful lot of respect for them. But that's not to say that other people haven't been instrumental in just adding that bit of gold dust. And of course, on a quiet Sunday, I quite like putting, I've listened to them all now actually, but if you haven't done it, Simon Sinek's Instagram Reels on play in your earphones while you go for a walk. I definitely walked around Hyde Park listening to all of Simon Sinek's Reels on Instagram, and he's obviously a smart guy, right? So
definitely inspiring.
The why, how, what has always resonated and still challenge any marketing campaigns with that, Apple versus Samsung. Why are Apple so successful? TED Talk from Simon Sinek that he did must be over 10 years ago now.
We'll definitely be noting down those names for the audience to basically follow up with them and, follow them. So coming back to probably, the industry, what's next for either Astral or, that could be a trade secret, so you don't have to answer exactly, but where do you see this industry going in terms of technology? Is there anything that you should keep out? Is it the clean sector that's taking over? Recently, I believe there's been an agreement between US and the UAE, $100 billion fund that they've agreed to invest and explore that clean tech energy. So how do you think, or what is the next step here?
Well, we've got to kind of break down the sector into various component parts. In Dubai here, it's quite easy to not see the component parts because DWA does everything from generation to the app that you hold in your phone to look at your energy consumption in your flat. In other parts of the world, it's really broken down into, you've got your generation, your distribution, your wholesale trade, and your retail. There are obviously more component parts, but to simplify it, getting to net zero, which is obviously the overarching global aim around energy, is all around generation. We've got to generate with more renewables. And obviously, I don't know what did you say the 100 billion? It would seem that they need to just install loads of solar panels here. It's a very, very easy place to have a very high percentage of renewable energy. And then you just need to throw in some battery banks, as they have done in Australia. I think Elon Musk's put one in Australia where they've got a big solar farm. And then that will just obviously give us the energy when it's dark, put very simply, and mitigate that electricity storage issue. I think in some of the more complex markets, we've got time-sensitive billing. So we bill energy for the big consumers on a half-hourly basis. So this is basically the market price driving when you should use energy. So if you're a factory in England, you try to use less energy in the afternoon because the price is maybe 5 times more than the price in the morning or the evening, for example. That's the spot price. And yet they'll hedge, so they'll buy on the futures market a block of energy, but they won't buy it all, so they'll still have to consume some and buy it at the spot market. So that's what's called a flex product. And that exists in quite a few markets for those large energy consumers. The thing that is for me, one of the big barriers to reaching net zero is the complexity of some of the deregulated industries, because your domestic tariffs for your homeowners, they have the most complex for them is a price during the day and a price during the night. And that means that it's very difficult to financially incentivize them to use energy when it's most abundant. The cost is the same, even when it's scarce. And, Europe's actually facing blackouts this winter. And if we could financially incentivize people, because we try to sort of ethically incentivize people, but it doesn't work as well as financially incentivizing them, particularly in capitalist economies. It's just a fact. So if we can get half-hourly price variance into homes, then you're going to be able to financially incentivize domestic users of energy to use energy when it's at its cheapest. The big blocker to that is the complexity of the energy market in a lot of these places, so that when they're deregulated, the pricing is so complex that the overheads in actually generating bills becomes a huge barrier. So we need the technology on the one hand on a generation side, and that I think is coming. But I think then to incentivize, the big thing with renewables is that obviously you can't control when the wind blows, when the sun shines, etc. So yes, we have storage, but then we also need to incentivize people to use energy most when it's abundant and scale back when it's scarce. And that happens on a daily basis. And for that, we actually need regulatory change in a lot of places, particularly in the UK, because the market's very complicated. And then the problem with that is you've got essentially the value chain that we explored here with DWAR, where they've generation to app, the whole value chain. In the UK market, that's been broken up into so many subcomponents.
So many moving parts to it.
Yeah. And all of those people, obviously, they'll be lobbying government not to change their slice of the pie, because otherwise, if you simplify those subcomponents, you're probably going to remove a few players. And obviously, there's going to be a lot of resistance to that, because there's going to be a negative impact on people commercially.
So you basically aim for the toughest market first.
I guess so. I mean,
you perfected that, and then you've spread out.
No, listen, we've certainly not perfected it at all. All we do is we provide the digital interface at the very end. So the app that sits in your hand that we talked about, that's basically the bit that Astral Tech do. Aspirationally, to really deliver net zero, this regulatory change, I believe, is something that has to happen.
Absolutely. Again, it's going to take a lot of time. I mean, I don't think it could happen overnight.
No, it's huge.
It's a huge transition.
Yeah. And you need to have the ears of government really to help drive that change, and that's quite tricky.
There's been a lot of initiatives carbon offsetting applications out there individually, where if you're traveling, you try to understand your carbon emission and then be able to offset that, and that money usually would go to a solar farm or to the development of clean tech or something. Do you think that has taken off?
Yeah, so that's a good thing to raise, I think. So there's what do we call it? Greenwashing.
Yeah.
Right, so there's that. That's how it started. Let me explain what I mean by that. So with the carbon offset credits, you could consume energy in December and buy a certificate for energy that was generated in June, match the two up and say, well, this energy was green, which obviously doesn't make sense, because the energy that you used may not have come from renewables, but you've just bought a renewables generation certificate. So what is the future of this, and it's already happening. I think France is one of the leaders on this, is where you've got to offset your consumption with a generation credit for the same day, ideally the same hour, ideally the same half hour, until you've got real-time transaction between generator and consumer of energy, so you genuinely have consumed renewable energy.
I mean, this connects with what you were previously talking about, incentivizing or maybe gamifying it. And then you have these sets of data that you can use to predict, what is the best time to be able to use this energy and incentivize that in a way. I mean, with Astral Tech, have you explored machine learning, AI? Have you gone down that route? Is that something that, you may want to down the pipeline, the roadmap of the product?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have an abundance of consumption data and some generation data, and this idea of using an algorithm to match consumption and generation is definitely something that we think about. And also using AI to forecast is something we've done some proof of concept work on as well. There are some people out there doing it actually already. It's not actually rocket science. You take your historic consumption, you feed in your variables that you think affect it, temperature, retail, how busy the shops are, if it's a retail outlet, for example, public holidays, this kind of thing, cloud cover, sunshine hours, and you put in all of those factors, and then you get an algorithm out the other side, such that you can put in some of the variables and it will tell you what you're going to consume, which helps you get more of an accurate forecast.
I mean, your journey has been amazing. Self-taught. Any advice that you would want to give to someone working within your industry?
Within the energy sector, I think you need patience, you need perseverance. I think those two things are quite key for the energy sector. I mean, I think I said we had a smart metering product in 2005 and then kind of had to wait till 2015 before it became commercially good for me, even if it was already commercially relevant to the small number of people that had, say, smart meters. So I think patience is key, and that goes hand in hand with there are various people can see the various things we need to do to reach net zero, particularly in some of these complex markets. But as we've just discussed, that's going to take regulatory change, which is a slow moving vehicle. I think more broadly in tech, which of course we're a tech company, but we're also in energy. So I sit looking at two industries, if that makes sense.
Even hardware. I mean, obviously hardware is involved as well. IoT.
Yeah, sure. I mean, they're the bits of machinery that collect the data that feed our systems. We're a good couple of steps removed from the hardware end of the data collection, though.
Smart systems, I mean, obviously, that's the elimination of those hardware. I mean, the dependency on that.
Yeah, from a software perspective, it's always best to be agnostic.
Absolutely.
Hardware, yeah.
All right. Once again, like anything particular about the ecosystem that you've noticed in Dubai that you'd like to point out and help guide the entrepreneurs of the region?
Well, the tech ecosystem. That is a good question. Although I'm here, I'm not that embedded in the tech ecosystem. I did a speech at GITEX, and a few people thought that there were some interesting snippets of information that I put out there.
It was you were talking about the do's and the don'ts.
The do's and the don'ts of bootstrapping. Yeah.
All right, let's hear it from you. The 10 do's and don'ts.
Oh, crikey, the 10 do's and don'ts. Well, it was all about whether or not you need an investor, and how you can grow a company without an investor. And the idea is to sell your POC, treat your first customer as your investor, as we mentioned earlier, deliver your MVP. But before you've even done that, if you've got a grand vision of a software product, you have to identify the smallest module that can deliver return on investment for a customer. So not the coolest bit, the bit that can deliver value. Because if you can sell something that delivers value, then people will buy it. So that then determines what your POC is. You then deliver that through your MVP. And I was saying, don't be scared to try and sell as a small company to very large companies, because actually you think they won't want to contract with you, but they're large companies. So, because you're small, you can probably do things very efficiently at very low cost. It's not a huge risk for them as long as it's not part of critical infrastructure or a critical piece of their ecosystem.
Yeah, a lot of people are like looking into perfecting that. I mean, I'd say with experience, comes perfection on the product. So that's great. Like reaching out, that's motivating to, I believe, everyone to be able to go and sell, at least be able to pitch to them and to, what you guys actually do. If you're solving a problem, if it's a genuine MVP that kind of validates it, they should go for it. So those were 5 do's. What about the don'ts?
What about the don'ts? Well, one of them would be, the don'ts are always do's. So they're kind of as well. So one of the things would be, don't necessarily strive for technological perfection, because you'll be there an awful long time and you may never achieve it. Actually, what you need to strive for,
I agree 100%. I mean, what I usually tell the customers when they start off saying, hey, we want to be able to use this technology for this. I'm like, no, we're starting off the wrong foot here. Technology is meant to basically follow, right? So we will identify the technology, but let's first focus on, what problem.
The business need.
Yes, the business need, the market requirement, and we will identify the technology eventually.
Yeah, so that's a golden rule. It's it's come out of for me, that's come out of the same school of thinking as the keep it simple, the KISS. So that is for when you're discussing what you want, you ban the conversation that we say that's solutionizing. This meeting's not about solutionizing. We need to understand the aims and the objectives and the outcomes and what we need to do. And if we start talking about how we do it, then we close that conversation down.
So number 1 is don't focus too much on the technology. It would eventually follow up in what the objectives are.
Yeah, and remember what the top level objectives are to the ultimate decision makers. So we have a digital product, but what I say to people is we actually deliver customer satisfaction and OPEX reduction. So these are 2 drivers that the CEO is interested in. He doesn't care if you achieve that by using carrier pigeons or digital, really. He's interested in customer satisfaction and reduced OPEX, because he's looking at numbers and ratings, right? So technology is always a means to achieve a business outcome. And I think that some businesses, they are led by technologists, and that's good, because you do need technologists for sure, but they've got to have a firm grasp on business as well. And I think that perhaps that's something that I definitely instill into my technology team. So they might be, we have perfectionists in our technology team. That's great. They'll be striving for architectural nirvana, and I'll sit them down and explain the business drivers of why we're even doing this in the first place. And then a few of the pennies start to drop and they start to make smart decisions. They start to keep things simple. They start to deliver products that are actually delivering the business outcomes rather than getting caught up in technological perfection.
Absolutely. Being able to mold technology to your advantage. That's the thing. If you stay stuck in that, then you'd be in a constant loop. And like you said, I mean, when you're bootstrapping, your MVP is not generating revenue if you're just, chasing technology. That's why, we've got this, it kind of goes hand in hand with, the name of the season, the name of the show, Technology for a Change. Great. That was the don'ts. And the do's and don'ts of bootstrapping with Jeremy. I appreciate you taking out the time. We will definitely be in touch. There's usually what I've noticed is so many topics that you could just continue talking about.
We've touched on a few for sure.
Right. We would definitely be in touch. I hope to have another cup of coffee with you soon. I appreciate your time, and we'll definitely be taking down notes for you guys. And once again, thanks for watching.
Thanks very much.